Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session. I think let's give the others about 2 to 3 more minutes to join us, and then we can get started with today's session. In the meantime, can we please just insert our student numbers in the chat box, please, so that we can record attendance? Thank you. Okay, so I don't see anyone else having joined, but I do hope that some more of us or some more people join us. Otherwise, it's quite a lot of students then who would have missed out on this unit, and from Monday we are going to continue. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. Most people said on Monday that Wednesdays is good for them. So yeah, we'll see if this works. So if it doesn't, then we can retry. But yeah, for now, I think we'll just work with what we have. Thank you for those of you who are here. Right, so I think we'll just get started. I am not going to really walk through this. I believe we are all familiar with the admin of these sessions by now. This is actually our 10th session, so we should all be well familiar with that. All right, so just a quick recap. On Monday, we looked at Unit 4, which was Ethics in Research. And we looked at, what the meaning of ethics is, not just in research, but in general. And from there, we gathered that ethics is, sort of this moral code that governs and guides us in society, and also that every profession and body or organization would have or do have sort of their own code of conduct or their own rules or guidelines that govern, acceptable and unacceptable behavior. We looked at a few situational factors of, what are the circumstances that one needs to consider, or in which circumstances do we need to consider ethics, speaking specifically about the research process or in the research process. And then we looked at the scientific norms, which we basically revisited from Unit 1. And I wonder if, because Monday was only a day ago, or is it 2 days ago, I wonder if you guys can share with us what scientific norms we covered on Monday and what they mean. So you'll note that these norms have come up twice now. So that already tells us that they're quite important to know and to understand. Does anyone remember what those norms are? You're welcome to put that in the chat, or again to raise the hand and unmute your mic and then share your thoughts with us. Okay, Sandra says universalism, which means that work must be judged by everyone, of course. So no one's work in the research community should sort of escape judgment or critique. Everyone should be able to basically evaluate everyone's research. Just because Professor Jonathan Jensen is a prof and really an expert in his field, that does not mean that we cannot evaluate and critique his work, right? What else do we remember? Right, so I'm seeing the norms. I'm not seeing what they mean. Can you guys, or ladies, can you please break that down to us? Maybe some of us in the class don't necessarily remember, what does disinterestedness mean? How does that apply to the research community? Right, so the personal attachment should be removed from research, right? And if you'll notice from all of these norms, if we start picking up that the general theme and the idea is that, you know, researchers really need to be as objective as they can be in evaluating the work, removing personal biases when evaluating research, ensuring that everyone is evaluated, communality, ensuring that everyone has access, you know, that the research is shared, right? Organized skepticism, being critical about what we're reading, really removing the name. And this is quite a good practice, is when journals, when journals receive articles and they send it to reviewers, they often remove the name of the authors because they don't want the reviewer to be swayed by the name. If it's a well-known person and you're like, oh, I'm reviewing, you know, this expert's research, then you will have some sort of bias towards that paper. So really removing any personal attachment, removing any personal bias from the evaluation of your research. Okay, so those are the scientific norms that we talked about. And then we went in and looked at ethical issues in research relating to human rights. And we said how important it is in the social sciences, especially, to be aware of the human rights and to be considerate of the human rights of, one, the participants that participate in our research, the people that we are working with, and two, also the people that we are representing through our research. So if it's if it's research on a particular community, then I need to, you know, ensure that no harm comes to that community, that my research does not have any negative implications for those people. So in these ethical issues, as I've mentioned, we looked at the concept of doing no harm, which really is self-explanatory. But then we really delved in a little bit deeper and said that doing no harm doesn't only refer to the physical harm, because I think that's what we immediately think about when we hear the words do no harm. It's like, oh, I'm not going to fight you. I'm not like going to hit you in any way, so I'm not doing any harm to you. But we said that, you know, the research should not do any physical harm to someone, but also not do any psychological or emotional or mental harm to the person. So, you know, in this, we looked at the way certain questions that are asked, the way certain questions are asked, the way that the research is designed should ensure that the participant is protected from any type of harm, right? And then we looked at obtaining consent. Can someone remind us what we talked about under obtaining consent? What does it mean, and what are sort of the factors that we need to consider? Sorry about that. Okay. So we're saying that it's ensuring participants understand what the research is about exactly, and ensuring that participants are informed of all aspects of research, including how it will be undertaken. Exactly, that's what we looked at. We said that it is so important for participants to be aware of all the information so that they can make an informed decision, right? So that we get informed consent and not just consent. And then we also talked about, the requirements for getting a consent, being one of them being the person's ability. Can you remind us what we said about the person's ability and how this relates to how this is a requirement for ethical consent? Okay, Fiona says that is the person legally, mentally, emotionally, intellectually able to consent? If not, it would be deceptive and exploitative. Yes, exactly. We need to ensure that the person is in sound mind, that the person is of age and really has the ability to consent. That's, yeah. And if they're not, then it is important to ensure that we get substitute consent, which is, let me just check that I'm using the right terms here. Yes, substitute consent, which is then from someone who can legally represent the individual that we are working with. Right. And then we went into ensuring privacy and the importance of that in the research process, how important it is to ensure that the identities of the participants are protected, and two, that whatever the participants have said does not somehow connect them to their identity, right? So that's So that's what we looked at, and we said that there are certain things that can hinder the privacy of the participants. For example, the sensitivity of the issue, if it is a very specific issue with very specific target group, then it may be easier to identify who those people are. And then we said about the place where the research is done, that also has implications for the privacy factor, that you can't just sort of walk into someone's hospital room and ask for an interview. That is a breach of privacy right there, because no one's expecting to have to do an interview in a hospital while they're on their hospital bed, sorry. And then we talked about the fact that if the research is being conducted in public, that according to the study unit here, that it is okay to sort of get to collect data without getting direct consent from the people, because they're at a train station or they're shopping and I'm just observing shopper behavior, so I don't need to necessarily go and ask every shopper for consent. And then finally, we said that, in ensuring privacy, we need to really assure the participants that, listen, your details are not, your identity won't be published. And the details that we do collect from you, the personal details, these will only be seen by the researcher or the principal investigator or the supervisor. So a very limited amount of people should have access to that information. Okay, so not to delve too long on that because I think it's still very fresh in our minds. Then we looked at sort of the ethical issues related to different research approaches. And if you remember from Unit 3, yes, we looked at the two major approaches to research, which is qualitative and quantitative research. And we said that, each of these approaches have implications for ethics. Sorry, let me just check the comments here. Exactly. So that sometimes you can get consent after you've observed them, particularly in the public spaces. So you can do a debrief interview and then get consent. So yeah, that's a very, very good and important point. Thanks, Fiona. All right, so yes, with regards to qualitative and quantitative, we said, each of these approaches come with different methods, and each of those methods have ethical implications. So yeah, without going too much into it, of course, we said that, with the quantitative, which has a lot of experiments, there are just lots of issues that can come up about experiments and, is it harmful? How are you protecting your participants in these experiments? And then with qualitative with qualitative studies, we have the issue of, interviews sometimes being deceptive, where the researcher doesn't disclose fully what the interview is going to be about, and then the participant has given consent and now they're in the interview and someone is asking them about their smoking habits when they were told that it's just a lifestyle audit thing, research. And then asking leading questions, that's something we talked about as well. And recording participants without their knowledge, that's also extremely unethical. Cool, moving swiftly along, then we looked at the ethical issues relating to the research professional themselves, so sort of the standpoint that the researcher takes. Can you quickly remind us what those various standpoints were and which one is the best to use? Right. Thanks, Sandra. So Sandra says that situationism is the best. It allows you to adjust to people and their circumstances. Perfect. I'm not going to go into the others. I believe that we are aware of them, and if not, we do know where to find them. But it is absolutism and what was that one? Absolutism and antinomianism. So yeah, I think if you haven't already, I think it's a good thing to make for yourself a list of all these terms that come up, especially the ones that are on the column. The side is it? I think it's the right hand or the left hand side of the study unit, where it provides you a term and gives you the definition. Those are very, very important terms. So if you don't have a list of them already, or I think I'd recommend just have a place where you're sort of noting down all these terms and their definitions. They do come up they are very important for exam and assignment prep, exam prep at this point. All right, and then finally we looked at just ethics in the research stages. And essentially we said is that ethics cannot be avoided in any stage of the research. It forms part of every single stage. And therefore, the researcher needs to really always be mindful about the ethical implication of everything in the research. Right, so that was our quick Unit 4 recap. I feel like I really rushed through that, so I hope that everyone is still with me. And if you were not with us on Monday, Jacques has provided a link in the chat for all the previous recordings of the session. So I'd really, really encourage you to go and watch that so that all of this can really make sense and come together for you. Okay, cool. So Jacques has put a very interesting point in that in South Africa, there's a difference between a consent and assent form. So consent is for those who are older than 18 years old, and then assent is the agreement of someone not able to give legal consent to participate in this activity. Okay, that's a very, very interesting point. Thanks for that, Jacques. So yeah, I suppose in research which involves minors, for example, you would have both, right? So you would have the assent form for the child, assuming the child can understand. If it's a 15-year-old, they can assent, or they can sign an assent form. You'd explain the research to them in the presence of their parent or legal guardian, and then the legal guardian would then sign the consent form, I believe. Yeah. All right. So since we've said that, ethics forms part of every stage in the research process. That takes us into our session for today, which is Unit 5, where we're looking at the research design. And so when we think about our research process, we understand that it's a process that needs to be very, or not very, but that needs to be structured, right? That needs to be quite thought out and quite well planned if we are to go about it and do effective research. So we know then. So from this, then we understand that research design forms part of our research process and actually forms a very, very important part of our research process, right? We also know from sort of a few sessions back that we do research every day, right? Or we observe things and we ask ourselves questions, and we don't necessarily want to find the answer. Sometimes we might do a quick Google search and like, oh, so that's that. So that in that we've done research, but we have not being systematic in it, right? And this is where the difference coming with like everyday inquiries, let me call it that. Everyday inquiries versus, actual research is that the process of actually putting down a plan, actually being systematic about it is what then makes it scientific research, or what makes it research. So when we think about our research design, I like to think about setting down a blueprint. Is there a blueprint for your house? Is that what it's? I think that's what it's called when you're about to build your house. So you have your architect, and then you sort of tell them this is your vision, this is your plan, and the architect will go ahead and really put down the plan for this house. This is what our research design does. It helps us to decide how we're going to about doing the research. So we do this after we've actually formulated our problem. So it's not at the research design stage. It's not when you meet the architect that you still start thinking about, what kind of house do I want? Do I want a double story? Do I want a triple story? Do I want 3 bedroom? It's not at that point. You should have at that point formulated your problem. You know what your research questions are, you know what your objectives are, and you've already started thinking about how you're going to collect data, so that by the time you need to sort of plot out a research design, it's really about the how. Okay, how am I going to do this now? And yeah, ticking up all those boxes. So with research design, they can be either precise or flexible. So really, as the words say, a precise research design is really, really strict. It is letter for letter. It is rigid. Everything is planned out. Everything is, once this happened, then this happened, then that happens. This can't happen before this happens. So, it's a very strict process, and there's really no room to move. There's no wiggle room in that kind of design. Versus, of course, a flexible design, as the word tells us, the flexible, there's a lot more space to move, to wiggle. So yes, we've put down a plan, but we realize if this doesn't go according to plan, the plan was to interview 50 students. If I get 45, it's okay. There's some wiggle room for that, right? Whereas a rigid or precise design will say, no, we can't move forward. We only have 45 students. We need to get 5 more. So that is the difference between a precise and a flexible research design. So my question then to you is, which research approach do you think each of these research designs would fall into, and why? So when we say research approach, remember we talked about qualitative and quantitative, right? So which one would a precise or flexible design fit in, and why? Okay, so I see a response from Fiona, which says that, so quantitative research for a more precise research design, exactly. You said looking at cause and effect. So yes, but I don't know if that's a strong enough why for quantitative research, because a qualitative study can also needs to be planned before starting, you know. So why exactly in a quantitative research study do we need a more precise research design? So to remember which data belongs to which case, yes, that is a reason. because the instrument might need to be set up beforehand. That is also a reason. Yeah, I think yeah. So that all of those are reasons, definitely. Yeah, and I think the main cause then being that we're working with quantitative data, we're working with numbers, we're working with statistics. It's going to be very difficult if we're being super flexible in a study where we've collected, for example, the stats of unemployment stats for the year for 2020. We've collected that, and then the researcher says, you know what, I have a flexible design. So I'm just gonna, after we've collected and now we start analyzing, right? We start doing the calculations, and then the research is like, you know what, I think I must just go collect some more data. This isn't enough. I'm gonna go collect more. So what that does, it completely messes up your analysis. It will completely mess up your statistics because now you need to re-input all of those, all that data, taking into account the new data, and it just messes things up, right? Whereas with a qualitative study, which is, of course, we can reduce, is, for more flexible design. If I've done if I've done maybe 20 interviews and I've started analyzing, and through my analysis, I discover, I'm not really getting the crux of it. I feel like there's more I need to get from participants. I can at that stage, go back and re-interview those same participants, or I can go and interview more participants. So that flexibility will not drastically affect my data, right? Because my data won't necessarily be dependent on what my initial data, or my analysis won't be dependent on that. I can in my analysis then just add to now what I've gotten, right? So it's quite different because I suppose it's a case of working with numbers versus working with words. It's easier to formulate a narrative about this additional data than it is to sort of insert additional quantitative data into a formula that now needs to be redone, right? Okay, so though we talked about a flexible research design, which of course is quite nice in qualitative studies, because you might not have gotten what you needed to get in the first round of data collection, and so you can go back, and I think I must just note that that flexibility is not only around data collection, but really in every part of the research. So even if we're looking at theories, if I start a quantitative theory, a quantitative study, and I say I am using Pythagoras theorem. Sorry, that's the only like mathsy thing I can remember now. So I say I'm using Pythagoras theorem to work through the study. It's going to be a bit of a mess if I halfway through decide I'm no longer using Pythagoras theorem. I'm going to use some other theorem. I don't know any other. But with a qualitative study, it is a bit more, flexible. You can start off with, I'm going to use Karl Marx theory. And then as you go in, you realize that it's a bit lacking. Now I can actually add because I have a flexible design. So I can add and actually motivate, because the qualitative study gives you so much space to motivate, right? So you can motivate, initially we're going to just use this. Now we're going to add this theory, this social theory to it. So that we get a more robust understanding of the phenomena, right? So flexibility is in every aspect of the research, right? So as we were saying now about just because something is flexible, it doesn't mean that it must just be what do we say, dear Maka, like all over the place, right? It still has to be coherent. And that's what brings us to the section on design coherence. And we are told, or well, the coherent really meaning that a research design shows a unity of thought or purpose. So it must still make sense. Everything must still fit together logically. So I can't say I've started with a social action theory and then halfway through I added Pythagoras theorem. It does not make sense. Like, please make it make sense. So it is important that the research design, although flexible, it still shows that you're still sort of walking in a particular road. You still have a particular thought in mind, and whatever else that comes in or that is removed must be motivated by that thought that we have. So we know that then the research design is influenced by the paradigm that the researcher follows, and the researcher should be able to justify the study, the method, data collection, and analysis on the basis of this paradigm. And what are these paradigms that we looked at in Unit 1? We looked at positivism, interpretivism, and critical studies. Yes, those are what we looked at, but of course there are more. If you look in Unit 1 under the contemporary paradigms or contemporary approaches, I believe there's the feminist theory and some others there that are very interesting to read through. So essentially your research design must still show that you're still working in one paradigm. You can't just jump from in an interpretivist paradigm into a positivist. It's not going to work. So yes, the purpose and the proposed use of the study will also influence the type of study that will be done. I think we looked at this quite deeply in Unit 1. And then we're told that in a coherent research design techniques will match data analysis techniques. This shows us, that's coherence, that, every element of the research study was really thought out, and, it really is following one train of thought. So again, I can't say that I've collected qualitative data and now I want to use statistics to analyze it. It's not going to work. Or if I've collected quantitative data and now I want to write a whole thesis describing this quantitative data using qualitative analytical tools, it's not going to work. So yes. Are there any questions? Am I going too fast? Do I need to slow down? Are we all together? All right, thank you. Okay, so now we go in and we look at design validity in quantitative research. So if we think just off the bat of the word validity, root word valid, is a sort of, can I say if is it true? Is something valid? Does something make sense? Is something reliable? Right? So we look at internal validity, and we're told that it is the extent to which the study confirms the existence of a cause-effect relationship, and this in the context of quantitative research. Please note that. Okay. In the context of quantitative research, so our internal validity is trying to needs to confirm that the cause-effect relationship that we're saying exists really does exist. So if we have alternative, sorry, let me back up. Yes, so if the aim of the research is to explain relationships between variables, or to draw conclusions about cause effect, then, you know, we need to make sure that that is in fact what our research has done. So, for example, if we say that, I think I'm going to just try to run with the same example. If we're saying that high school learners drop out because they don't have friends, right? We're saying that there's a cause effect relationship there. The lack of friends equals to high dropout rates, right? So then, looking at internal validity, we will need to ensure that is there really this relationship that you know you are concluding, or the hypothesis that you're making, does it really exist? And has the research actually showed us that there is this relationship between it? So if we find that someone is like, well, you know, there's another explanation for this. They could be dropping out because they are struggling with the schoolwork. So that's an alternative explanation. And we're now told that an alternative explanation means that our internal validity is threatened, means that there's something not wrong, but there's something missing with our conclusion or our results. So it's important then in this case for the researcher to, I think, also make it clear that we're not saying that lack of friends is the only reason that these students are dropping out. Like you do account for other explanations, but we're saying that it is a reason, that it does have an effect, that there is a relationship there. So that then becomes important for the researcher to put out and to also recognize that there are other factors. But this is something that generally the researcher needs to do at the beginning of the study. You don't want to get to the end and say, oh yeah, by the way, I do know that, you know, this is not the only thing. You know, it has to be set from the get-go so that those reviewing that research are not reading it at the back of their minds just thinking, oh, but this is not the only reason. There's so many other reasons. And, you know, you haven't put it out as a researcher. So then we're told that in experimental research, variables or, you know, factors that threaten internal validity of the research results are ruled out at the design stage. So this is what I'm saying. We at the design stage already, we need to say, listen, I understand that struggling with schoolwork also affects. I understand that the home situation also affects. But we're going to rule that out for now. You know, our focus is this. So that needs to happen at the design stage already. So then we look at the threats to internal validity. What are these things that could make or bring doubt to the result or the conclusions that we have gained from our research? So the first one we're told is history. And this refers to if something has happened during the course of the research or during our experiment, something unexpected happens, and it ultimately changes the results that we get. That then is cause for someone to maybe start questioning our results. So an example, I suppose, is if we're looking at maths results in a classroom, and we say, okay, we want to see how students feel about, you know, how students are doing in this particular classroom. And then halfway through the semester, they get a new teacher. So that's now history happens or something happens, right? They get a new teacher, and that teacher is maybe really, really good, really excited, and is able to motivate students to get excited about maths. Suddenly, at the end of the semester, the students' results shoot up. Their maths results shoot up. Now it's a question of, now it becomes a question of, did this change happen because of the study or the experiment? Or was it because this thing happened, because they got a new teacher, that, you know, the results were like this? So that affects the results. And then the next one is maturation, or the fact that that there may be changes within the participants themselves over time. So they can go through psychological changes or physical changes, and this will also affect the result. So maturation may be that, you know, in the same example, maths example. So we're studying this class for a month. No, sorry, let's say a semester. And at the beginning, their marks were really low. But as I can't speak. But as the semester went on, you know, they begin understanding maybe that, listen, we are in grade 12. Oh yeah, we're in matric, right? So by June, their math results shoot up. Can we say that it's because we put this thing in place, or we put this experiment in place? And sorry, maybe I should clarify that, you know, in these studies, and when I say experiment, it means, you know, that we have put something in place. So we've seen that these students were doing really bad at math, and we've sort of maybe put an intervention in place, such as giving them tutors, let me say that. So all of these students have tutors now, and that's the intervention. And we want to see by the end of the semester if their results would have increased. So if we're talking about maturation in this case, we're saying, well, maybe as the semester progressed, these students began to understand that, listen, they're in matric, they really need to pass this so that they can, you know, apply for university. So this the psychological change in the students made them more serious about studying, and then therefore their results increased. So how can we then say that their results increased because of the tutors? You know, because if we haven't factored that they may have just matured over the semester, you know. I hope that is clear. And then the next one is instrumentation, meaning that something happens to the instruments that we are using to collect our data, and therefore it affects the results that we get at the end of the day. So for example, if I was using a voice recorder, if I was using a video recorder in the study with these kids, I'm video recording them every day in class. And then halfway through the semester, my video recorder breaks. Now I don't have a video recorder. I will have to make do with a voice recorder. So now for the next half of the semester, I'm only collecting data with this voice recorder and making my notes. That change in instrument is going to affect my results at the end of the day, because the level of data that I was getting at the beginning would not be the same as what I was getting at the end. So there will most likely be things that I missed at the end of you know, in the second half of the semester, things that, you know, you can't really capture by voice record only. So that influences your data and makes people question, you know, how can we be sure that this data is accurate? And then we have the selection. And as we know, selection will always affect validity, because, yeah, so selection really involves, you know, the participants that are selected for the study or for the experiment. Right, so it needs to make sure that, you know, they are randomly assigned, and that they are accurately selected. Otherwise, it will determine the results that you get at the end of the day. It will, you know, influence the results that you get. And then we say mortality, and if we think of mortality, we think more of like life and death rates, but in this case, mortality really is the fact that some people may just not continue with the study. So if I started my study with 20 students, and by the end of the study, I only have 8 students, that's a major drop. And that means that the results that I would have gotten with 20 students is not the results I'm going to get with 8 students. So that would then really bring into question the quality of my results, right? And then regression is the tendency of extreme, or I'm just reading here now, is the tendency of extreme scores to move towards the average upon retesting, right? So if I am looking at this group of students, and some of them are scoring very, very high, in the 80s and 90s, and then some of them are, scoring very, very low, then we do this test. We do the experiment, we're getting the tutors. At the end of the semester, we see that, those who were scoring really, really low, or maybe someone who was scoring very, very low, suddenly their results shot up. They went to like from a 30 to a 70. But now when we're taking averages, because it's a quantitative study, so now we're considering averages, that score moves to the middle, and so it's not really accurately representing what happened with the student. But of course, because it's a quantitative study, we can't look at individual cases. We have to sort of take averages into account. But it does skew the results, because you don't really see what happened from that 30 to that 70. You will see a 35, right? So that is a bit questionable there. And then finally is the testing effect, and we talked about this slightly last week, where the test itself, or the experiment itself, can affect the quality of the result, because the students know that, these tutors are here to help them. They are being tested, and someone is going to check by the end of the semester if they did better with the tutors or not. Then they change their behavior. They start working a lot harder. So it's not a case of, which is not bad. It's just that now we don't know if them working harder and doing better was because of the tutor, or because they knew that they were being tested and that someone was going to check their results at the end of the semester, right? So those are things that really threaten the internal validity of a quantitative research study. Are there any questions on that? Okay, so please make sure that you do revisit these terms and their meanings, and are able to really define it for yourselves. Yeah. Okay. So next we look at sorry, what's happening here? Sorry. Design validity in quantitative research. Now we're looking at, external validity. We've looked at internal validity now, and all internal validity, of course, is all those things within our study, things within the control of the researcher that will affect the results. And then, of course, external validity are those things external, outside of the researcher's control, which will affect the validity of the study. So yes, yeah, so the study unit actually makes a very interesting point that, most social science studies, or especially in the past, I think things have changed dramatically over the past few years, not few, maybe 50 years, I don't know. But things have changed dramatically in the research space, because previously a lot of social science studies were done with white middle-class men, which of course will have a major impact on the the quality of the results and the quality of those conclusions, because they had not, taken into account other races, other genders, other age groups. So this then brings us to the point that selection poses a huge threat to external validity. Selection poses a huge threat to external validity because if the people that are in our study are not representative of the larger population, our study is immediately skewed, right? Immediately skewed. So, yeah, I hope that's clear. I'm not going to go into an example for that. So essentially, the research or your research should reflect the real world, and we will look at sampling and representation in next modules. I'm not sure which one, but yeah, essentially it should represent the real world. So if I'm looking at unemployment in South Africa, I can't just be looking at unemployment amongst white males, middle class white males, right? Because that is not going to give me a true picture of unemployment. It's going to be a way skewed picture of unemployment in South Africa. So I need to then account for all people across all socioeconomic backgrounds, all races, a particular age group maybe. Yes, because so part of the research design would include age group. It's also very irresponsible to say, oh, I'm going to look at unemployment in South Africa. One does need to be specific and say, amongst 20 to 25-year-olds. That gives us a scope, and we'll look at scope later, but it gives us a threshold within which we're working so that I know that I'm looking at 20 to 25-year-olds, fine. That's the scope of my research, but I can't just look at men or I can't just look at women unless my study is specific to that group. I can't just look at one. It has to be representative and holistic. And then the next sort of threat to external validity is realism, or just the fact that the research, again, the research needs to reflect the real world. So if I'm doing I'm doing an experiment, right? And I'm putting these people in a particular situation, and I'm expecting them to react in a particular way. But that situation does not look like their normal situation. So how do you expect people to react naturally in an unnatural situation? So this is, one of the major issues with experiments, especially experiments with people. When it's in a lab and it's people studying like rocks and leaves and things that are not human, then it's a bit different. But if it's an experiment with human beings, you take them out of their natural environment and you put them in a lab or in some sort of controlled setting, you're not going to get the same kind of data that you would have if you left them in that classroom or in that gym or at the train station. You're not going to get the same result. So that makes it very difficult to motivate for external validity. And we are told that gains in external validity often gives the study less internal validity, because controlling a real situation is a bit more difficult. So if you see with internal validity, we're talking about all these things that we will need to maybe control, right, to ensure that our study is valid. But now, if we're looking at external validity and we're saying, okay, realism is an issue with external validity, right? I understand that, fine. So how do I prevent that? Let me leave the people in their natural situation, in their natural environment, which is the train station. How do you now ensure that the people are going to stay at the train station? How are you going to ensure that there's no noise or there's no this? So then it becomes hard for you to actually control those internal things that you would have been able to control if they were in an unnatural situation. So it's a bit of a balance there that researchers need to maintain. Cool. And then we just I see something, but I'll come to it now. And then we've got some other threats to validity, which does come up quite a lot, and we also touched on this, is the reaction effect. The reaction effect, where we said, you know, sometimes people are just going to act in a particular way because they know that they are being observed, they know they're being watched. Oh, I know I'm in this experiment, in some weight loss experiment, so I must work very hard and make sure I lose this weight, you know, because, you know, someone's going to test how much weight I lost at the end of the month. So people will change behavior based on the knowledge that they are being observed, and that is what we had called the Hawthorne effect or the reaction effect. And then we've also got the research expectancy, which is essentially the fact that the researcher is expecting a certain outcome. As we said in Unit 1, even before you go into research, doing the actual research, you have an idea or some sort of expectation about what's going to happen. You have certain biases, and so the researcher's biases will also sort of affect the validity of it, because if you are more, if I can say, if you're more for the use of these diet pills, and we have an experiment and we've got our control groups, and I'm like, oh no, in my mind as the researcher, I'm like, oh, these diet pills definitely work. You know, you're going to be sort of biased towards the results and the experiment itself. Okay. So I see. Okay, not a question. Thanks, Adele. Okay. Then we have research designs which involve qualitative data. Right, so first we talked about validity. We talked about internal versus external validity and the things that affect this. And remember, all of this is still under quantitative research. And now we're looking at, you know, different types of research designs that are out there. So as we know that the aim of experimental research, which is mostly quantitative, is to show a cause-effect relationship between this. So how do we do that? Essentially, we want to create or manipulate a condition to ensure that we'll be able to study if A causes B, if lack of friends causes high school dropout. So we need to do an experiment. And in the experiment, the researcher creates, like I said, a condition or a situation, or changes an existing situation so that they can be able to really test this hypothesis, right? And so this is called a treatment. So a treatment is the intervention, right, or modification that is placed on a particular context to see for this cause-effect relationship. So we are told that true experimental designs are those in which the researcher manipulates the treatment conditions. And we just talked about what the treatment is. So that is, the researcher decides who receives which treatment. So essentially with a true experimental design, if I can just break it down, is that we will have two groups. We will have the experimental group and we'll have the control group. So what we're wanting to do is we're going to introduce an intervention, and the intervention can be anything really, but just an intervention or a treatment, and we will give it to only one of the groups, and this will be called the experimental group. So the experimental group will receive the treatment, and then the other group, the control group, won't receive the treatment. And then after a certain time, we want to see what are the differences between the experimental group and the control group, right? I hope everyone is with me there. So these groups will then be compared in terms of the response or in terms of the outcome that was given. So the example that we're using is the diet pool example, right? So our experimental group will receive a diet pool. Both groups will be told, listen, exercise, eat, or exercise or don't exercise, right? Whatever. They'll just be told, live your life as you do. No, sorry. Let me go back. Because one of the other conditions of a true experiment is that the groups need to kind of be similar. So we need to take two groups of people who are active. So in both groups, it's like, okay, they're active already, they eat healthy, they exercise. Now we're going to give one of them a pill, and we're not going to give the other one the pill, and we're going to see after a month if if anyone lost more weight or not, right? So that is our experiment. And we have manipulated the treatment, or the treatment that we're giving is, of course, this pill. But like I said, the treatment can also be, oh, we're going to give two groups of students a movie to watch, and then we're going to see how, we're going to give one, sorry, let me reverse on that. So we have two groups of students, and we want to know what their opinions are about Donald Trump, for example, right? So we do an experiment where in the first group of students, we actually show them a video of Donald Trump, and the other group of students, we don't show them a video. Then we interview both groups of students, and we say, what's your opinion on Donald Trump? What's your opinion? And then we basically compare the results and to see if the video or the treatment actually had an effect on the opinions of this student, right? So I hope that's clear. So that's a true experimental design. So we're told that the group that receives the treatment, for example, counseling, that is can be a treatment, is called the experimental group. Okay, I've touched on that. And then the second characteristic of the true experimental design is random assignment of the subject or sampling units to the treatment conditions or groups. Right. So So then random assignment is not the same as random selection. Right. Does anyone know why, or can anyone tell us why random assignment is not the same as random selection? Any ideas? Yes, exactly. So randomly putting people into groups as opposed to randomly selecting them for a study. That is exactly it. So with random selection is we take anyone, right? So if we're using the dice poll example, I am taking anyone on the street and I'm giving them, and then, I divide them into two groups, and I give one group the poll and I don't give the other group the poll. The issue with that is, if it's anyone, I don't know these people. I don't know if the some of them actually do exercise. Maybe some of them are already on a diet pool. Maybe some of them don't exercise at all. So how can I then compare the results at the end of the day if I'm working with such different people? So random assignment is then telling us the people actually the groups need to be similar. They need to have similar characteristics. That's why I went out and I looked for people who already are active, right? That I know that, oh, these people work out 3 times a week, they eat healthy, they walk every day, so that when I assign them to the groups, that I know that I'm basically everyone's starting at a sort of similar baseline. They are a particular weight, they all range within a particular weight. So now within this group of similar people, I will then randomly assign to the groups. So now when I'm putting them in the groups, that needs to be random. Yeah, that needs to be completely random. I can't say, oh, I'm going to take the ones who work out 4 times a week. I'm going to put them in one group, and the ones who work out 3 times a week, I'm going to put them in one group. No, it has to be random. So that's what we mean by that, okay? So essentially, they need to at least have similar characteristics. We need to be working from the same baseline. All right, and then we say that there are 2 types. I think I'm going to start just not wrapping up, but yeah, I am mindful of time. So and we're told that there are 2 types, or there are different types of true experimental design. And the one is a post-test only control group design. It's a lot of words, but it is essentially the default, right? If we do an experiment, and then we're going to do a test at the end to see, who got what result, who lost the most weight. So that's a post-test only. So we're only doing a test after the control group, after the experiment, right? And then we have the pre-test, post-test, which is essentially just a way to make the post-test a little bit more effective. So that then we do a pre-test first. So before they start the experiment, before we give anyone anything, we do a test. We see, okay, how much do you weigh? We get all this information, and then we do the experiment, and then we do a post-test to see, what the results were afterwards. So it's a way to really amplify the effectiveness of the study. So I suppose it's not really different types of, but just a different variations of the same study. But all of these are true experimental designs. So yeah, I think the important thing to take note of here is those characteristics of a true experimental design. The first one being that there needs to be a treatment, there needs to be a treatment, right? It's not an experimental design if there's no treatment. And B, it's not a true experimental design. And then 2 is that it has to be randomly assigned. The participants have to be randomly assigned for it to be a true experimental design. Okay. Then we go to pre-experimental design. So the difference is there we said true experimental design, and here we're saying pre-experimental design. So the pre-experimental design is saying that essentially, sorry, let me just get to it. So pre-experimental design doesn't necessarily have a treatment condition. May not involve manipulation of a treatment condition, but they do not include randomization. So it could have a treatment, it could not have a treatment, but the main thing is that it doesn't include randomization. So it's actually selecting who's going to be in which group. And they're actually telling us that this design must actually be avoided, because as we can see, like if we just think about what we learned from the true experimental design, it really doesn't make sense if I'm not going to randomize, right? It really doesn't make sense. It makes the study very flawed. And so we have 2 types here. The one group post-test only design. So one group, I suppose it's quite straightforward if we just look at the words themselves, is we're only looking at one group. So I'm not doing a study with looking at 2 groups so that I can compare. I've only got one group, and then I'm only doing a test after. So I've got one group and I give them a treatment, and then I test afterwards, right? Oh, and then we have the one group pre-test, post-test, which again is just a variation where I have my one group, but first I test them, then I give them the treatment, and then I test them at the end. So I'm only comparing their before and their after. I suppose this is what people usually do. You compare the before and the after, whereas with the true experimental design, I'm looking at the before and after of 2 groups, right, to see if this thing actually works. With this one group thing, it's like you don't really know if it works. You don't know if they lost weight because of this pool because there's nothing to compare it to, right? Okay, and then we've got the quasi experimental design, and I think if we know the word quasi, it's usually like something that is like something, right? It's like it resembles something. So quasi experimental resembles an experimental design, but it really, like I suppose it really isn't. So quasi experimental design resembles a true experimental design in that the researcher aims to establish cause and effect. However, it does not involve randomization. Again, it does not involve randomization. So, sorry. So I think if we can just note the differences between these various these various designs, that's really going to help us. So pre-experimental, we say that it may or may not involve a treatment, and it does not have randomization, right? So the treatment is optional. It could be there, it could not be there, but it does not have randomization. Quasi-experimental, we're saying there's no randomization at all. So it does have a treatment, right? It does have a treatment, but there's no randomization. And the type that we are introduced to here is a time series design. And the time series design is really a design in which you observe this group of people over some time. So maybe if it's 6 months, I observe them for 3 months. I'm not doing anything. I'm just observing, or I'm just testing them. And then I introduce a treatment maybe by month 4. And then they sort of going through the treatment month 4, month 5. Then I remove the treatment, and then I see from month 6, 7, and 8 what changes there are, right? So you see that it's like it's sorry. So you see that there is this flow of no treatment, introduce the treatment, remove the treatment, and see what the differences are there. So again, here it could also just be one group or no groups. But yeah, it's also not super highly recommended. Okay, and then we've got the final one, which is a single case experiment. And as the word says, a single case, you're only looking at one thing. So it's only one person or it can actually one person or one group or one team. And you're really just observing this person's behavior, or this person's behavior before and after an intervention. So a single case experiment can actually fall quite nicely in line with a time series design, because if it's just one person that you're observing, you really need to observe them for a long time for you to be able to see any type of results. Right. Where am I now? Okay. So then we go into qualitative. All of that was just quantitative. I can't really believe it. So then we go into qualitative. And we're told, or we know that, with qualitative, we don't necessarily need experiments, because it's not about controlling or measuring variables. The qualitative researcher is really trying to interact with individuals, understand their perspectives, understand how they interpret things, how they make meaning of things. And because of this, our data is mostly going to be collected by interviews and observation, right? There are other methods of qualitative data collection, but sort of the most popular one is interviews and observation. And then we're told that qualitative research is cyclical rather than linear. So it brings us back to the point about flexibility that we spoke about. And we said, well, the qualitative research, it's easy to come back. So if you think of a circle, it's easy to come back to the same point. Oh, I was here, I was doing my literature review, and then I started my data collection, then I started reading some more, and now I go back to my literature review. to, you know, add things or remove things. I collected my data, and then I started analyzing it. Now I realize that I'm missing some things. I go back to data collection point to collect more data, and so I can add it to my analysis. So it's more cyclical than rigid. Than linear. And we know that linear is rigid. Linear just goes one way. We don't turn back. And that's more quantitative. So by this, we can then assume that, you know, when we're talking about a research design for a qualitative study, that it's more going to be a guideline for, you know, how to go about it, more than a rigid, like, oh, you must do this in this order. So the qualitative research design is really more of a guideline. It's like, oh, this is what I plan on doing, but always with the mind that if something changes, if the situation requires me to change, I am open to that. I'm flexible, and that is my research design. So there are a few key issues with, and I'm really going to try to, if you guys can bear with me, we've just got maybe 10 more minutes. And then so I can just wrap this up nicely. Right. So we've got 4 key issues when it comes to the qualitative research study. And it is boundaries, design flexibility, the research relationship, and intended outcome. And we're just going to look at those closely for a minute. So the scope or the boundary is because we know that, listen, the qualitative researcher really wants to go deep. It's about depth. It's about exploring exactly what people are experiencing, how they're feeling. So because of this, it's very difficult to, I suppose, draw boundaries. So yes, you want to explore how these high school students are experiencing the lack of friends. But where's the limit? What boundaries are you putting in place to ensure that your research doesn't go over 5 years, or that your research doesn't start looking at every single thing about social relationships, right? So then the researcher needs to really say that, okay, I'm looking at friendships, but only this, right? So that you don't go deep, because I think we all get this when you start speaking to someone and you only plan to just speak about a particular thing, but then the conversations go on, and next, you know, we're talking about family, and next, you know, you talk about work, and you know, it's really hard to maintain that boundary. And this is what happens in qualitative research. It becomes difficult to maintain the boundaries. So yeah, the researcher needs to really be aware of this and think about, you know, what boundaries they're going to put in place in terms of techniques. Yes, the design is flexible, but I also need to put boundaries. I can't say that, oh, I started and said that I'm going to do interviews and observation. Next, I'm saying, oh, I actually want to add surveys, and I actually want to add a case study. Like, there needs to be a boundary, like, and the techniques and the observation to all of this. Right, so then scope then refers to the degree to which the findings of a particular study can be generalized to other settings or people. So yes, the researcher needs to look at if the study is meant to, so maybe to back up, I should say all those boundaries are determined by your scope. So the scope will determine, you know, what exactly I'm going to look at, how many things I'm going to look at, who I'm going to look at. So within the scope, we look at, is the study meant to provide an in-depth description and interpretation of a single person, event, or setting? So if it's meant to, if I'm doing a study on Julius Malema, right, I want to do an in-depth study about him, right? Then, you know, my boundaries, it already sets up my boundaries. It means I can't go talk to some random Joe on the street. No, I need to talk about to Julius Malema. I need to talk maybe to his family, his friends, his wife, you know, the people that are close to him that can give detail into him. So that already limits me gives me a boundary within to work in. Am I trying to describe something or just interpret it? So there's a big difference there, but I'll leave that for you guys to read. And then secondly, is the study intended to bring certain forms of information together across a broader front, or is it, a limited thing? Is my study meant to be generalized and for high schools for high schools all over the world to be able to use this information, or is it really just for this particular high school? Is it really just for Belhar High? So that will also give me a sort of a scope, a boundary within to work in. If it's just Belhar High, I only need to talk to people at Belhar High. If it's something that I want more people across to speak to, then I need to say maybe I should speak to people at Belhar High, Belleville High, I don't know what other high schools there are. Haven't been in high school for a while. So yeah, so you see that scope, but it allows you to branch out more because you want this to be a broader study, right? Cool. Are there any questions so far? Are we still together? Okay, I see we are still here. Okay, and then we talk about design flexibility, and remember now we are within the qualitative research design. And we talked about this already, actually, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But we said that then because qualitative research is the art of finding the right balance, essentially, between specifying every step and leaving the research route entirely open. So it's either I follow a very rigid process, or I'm like, you know what, it's open. But whatever position you take, it's important to be clear from the onset on how much and what sort of design flexibility you will allow. Like I said, just because the design is flexible doesn't mean that you have free reign. You need to, from the get-go, say, I can only deviate from this plan up to a certain point. I can't start the blueprint of the house and it was a double story, and by the end of it I'm like, you know what, we're going to turn this into a flat with a couple of blocks here. So there needs to be a limit as to how flexible are you with what are the things that you can't really move away from. So flexibility, as we know and we've been saying, allows the researcher to be open to the dynamics of the situation. So he or she should anticipate that new issues may arise as the study continues and really be able to be open to changing accordingly. But of course, now not too much. That is why it's important to set from the get-go. If something changes drastically, then what implications does that have for your study? The design flexibility will also influence how you collect data and what analysis techniques you will use. Just see here. Okay, thanks, Aline. No problem. Okay, then we have the research relationship, and I think we'll close here. So the research relationship, is about the researcher and the closeness of the researcher with their research. As we really mentioned from the start, from Unit 1, that all research, we all have a personal attachment, maybe not attachment, but there's a personal interest to the research that we do. It's something that maybe you've experienced or you've seen in your community, something you're passionate about. That's why you're doing that research. But now it's important for the researcher to then highlight from the get-go what relationship they're going to have with the researcher. If and this is dependent on how they're going to do the research, which is why we're looking at it under the research design. So if it's an interpretive study, if I'm following an interpretive paradigm, then the relationship that I need to then have with the studies that I'm open to the different meanings. It means if something comes up in an interview, I'm open to exploring it. But if it's a more critical thing that I'm just exploring things that are already there, then I need to in the same line, I need to say, no, I need to be objective because I'm taking a critical approach paradigm here, right? So I need to be critical. There's no sort of room for feelings and emotions, but generally, for certain purposes, qualitative researchers find it useful to view themselves as being objective and even having a distant relationship from the research subject. So you want to be understanding, especially in interviews, right? You want to be understanding of the participant's perspective. You want to give them the space and the talk, but you don't want to be like crying with them. You still need to maintain a level of objectivity, because at the end of the day, you are a researcher and this is a participant and you have information that you need to get. If, of course, like, for example, now, if someone starts crying, of course, you allow them to cry and you comfort them, but it's important to still try to maintain some sort of distance. It shouldn't be that after the interview now you become this person's counselor, because that is not your job, unless it is your job. But yeah, it wouldn't be in the context of the research. Okay, and then the intended outcome also has a role to play in the research design. So how you, yes. So usually the researcher will want to provide a description, right, and an interpretation of whatever they are studying, but they already sort of have an outcome in mind. So it's important to then reflect on that and ensure that if the data tells you something else, then you need to follow what the data says. And here we're told that description and interpretation are two different things. Sorry, I actually touched on this in a previous point, so yes, I'll leave that for you to read. So you need to decide how much of your study will be, description, and you're just describing something, and how much of it will be interpretive. So another problem relating to the intended outcome of the study is whether you will use your study simply to reflect or to change the phenomena, right? So that's going to have an effect on your research design. If it's something that I just want to reflect on, for example, the state of unemployment in South Africa, that is going to influence how I'll go about doing my research, versus if I want to change the state of unemployment in South Africa, then I'll take a very different approach in my research design. Sorry, let me just see. All right, thanks, Soraya. All right, so yes, that really is it. In the next thing, I think I will leave this to you on page, let me find this, on page 142, we are given a few examples of qualitative research designs, and it breaks down sort of a description of the study. It shows us what the scope is. It shows us the flexibility, the relationship, and the outcome. So this is a nice way of, I suppose, applying what we've just learned. So I will encourage you to please go through it, read through it, see if you can connect it to what we've just talked about today. There's some really, really good examples that really make bring these terms to life, and and we're able to see its relevance in the research space and in our space and in our lives. And I like that. I like when examples are presented, because it is one of the best ways that we learn, because we're able to visualize things in our mind's eyes, and that helps us to actually retain the information a lot more than if we're just presented with definitions and things. So you will notice that this is my style. I like presenting examples, and I hope that they do actually help, and they do help to really solidify the definitions and the terms and the concepts that we use. All right, so with that being said, that is it. If there are any questions, please let me know. I'm going to stick around until maybe for another 10 minutes. If you want to ask any questions, remember that we do have the the one-on-one consultations that you can book, and there is a link in the chat there. And if you guys could also please just fill out the evaluation form. I don't see the link, but I'll just find it now. Yes, so if you could also, oh, there it is. Thanks, Adele. Please also just fill out the feedback form. I'd really, really appreciate that. And then I will see you guys on Monday, and we'll do Unit 6. Yeah, I hope that the session was fruitful and helpful. And I again encourage you to go back and read through this unit. Repetition is also a really good learning strategy. So the more you're exposed to something, the more, of course, you're able to retain and remember. So yeah, I will just encourage you guys to keep on doing that. Okay, that's it for me. You guys have a lovely evening, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye.